The First Law of Magic, Chapter 3, and Broken. The next few hours spent tromping through the forest were remarkably pleasant, though Twilight couldn't say that she enjoyed it. She had just lost her entire family forever, or the foreseeable future, if she was lucky. Her shattered leg hung limply from the bear's embrace, every so often hitting a branch or tangling into a bush. All of that 100 miles from her home, rendering any attempt to raise her mood only marginally successful. After a while, Fluttershy's arms became tired, and Twilight was forced to hobble the last few minutes with a fretful bear by her side, constantly catching her when she fell and offering polite words of encouragement. Though Twilight had insisted that she was fine, by the time Fluttershy mentioned that they were getting close, the unicorn was forced to admit that she was anything but fine. The feeling of her bones rattling around inside of her leg was like jiggling a sock filled with twigs. Just thinking about it made Twilight shudder with disgust. She had no idea why it didn't hurt, but by now the sheer sensation alone was beginning to drive her to madness. She was pretty sure that they would have to amputate it if they didn't get to a hospital quickly. She sighed and stopped for a moment.
Hold on, Fluttershy, just give me a minute.
The bear stopped a few paces in front of the tired unicorn, shyly wringing its huge paws together, and glancing down at the pony nervously.
Are you going to be okay until we get to the hospital?
Twilight breathed hard, looking down at the ground while doing her best not to think about her leg or the unnerving sensations coming from it. With a deep sigh, she took a step forward.
Yeah, I think so. How much further?
The bear looked from the unicorn and then over its own shoulder, squinting into the gloom that had only gotten deeper by the minute.
We aren't far now. If you keep walking straight, you should hit it. I'm gonna go take up some gems that I'd stashed away for an emergency. It'll just be a minute. Are you going to be alright? I should be fine, but why do you need gems?
The bear looked back, cocking an eyebrow.
Well, how else are we going to be able to pay for getting your leg fixed?
With that, the bear turned and left, tromping off deeper into the forest. Twilight blinked twice.
What an equestrian— Wait, we have to pay for a hospital stay? This really is the cursed and desolate hellhole.
She shook her head and walked towards the direction the bear had initially signaled. The second Fluttershy was gone, the forest seemed too close in around her, reminding the unicorn that she was alone once more. The few brave streams of light that broke the canopy were barely able to illuminate the forest floor enough for her to see where she was going. She focused her attention on the ground just before her, carefully choosing each step to make sure that she didn't trip and fall once more. She became a lot less sure of herself without the bear's company. The forest grew darker when she realized that she could no longer hear the heavy footsteps of the kind bear. Twilight cursed her luck and picked her way through the underbrush, more than a little annoyed that there wasn't a path, despite the relative closeness to the supposed town. A few more feet in, and a large leafy bush blocked her path. Grunting, she picked her way around the bush. She made sure that she didn't overstep, lest she end in a heap without Fluttershy nearby to pick her back up. When she finally managed to get around the bush, which was way bigger than she had first thought, a soft red light could be seen seeping through the cracks left between the foliage. In front of her was civilization. The light was welcoming and disturbing in equal measure. It was soft and almost gentle. It reminded Twilight of the Red Cross that stood atop most hospitals. Only small spears of light made it through the foliage and illuminated the underbrush, casting everything around it in an almost sinister light that mingled with the shadows. Twilight gulped and took a step forward, only to shriek and stumble backwards when a huge black shape rose before her. The shape screamed back in a high-pitched feminine voice. Twilight's scream died in her throat near instantly. She squinted her eyes into the gloom.
Fluttershy?
The huge furry shape stopped screaming and settled back down onto all fours. It took a step back, only to blink, revealing a soft and gentle pair of teal blue eyes staring back at the unicorn. Twilight breathed a sigh of relief at the sight. She knew a bear's eyes didn't have the light, emotion, or color of a pony's, or whatever Fluttershy once was.
I'm sorry if I startled you, Twilight.
The bear pawed at the earth submissively, looking down and away from the unicorn. Twilight's metaphorical heart melted at the sight as she let out a breath of air.
It's fine, just warn me next time. A bear popping out of the woods right in front of me is not something my bladder can take a second time.
The bear blushed a little and gave Twilight a gentle smile.
Sorry, I'm not used to being able to sneak up on anyone. Almost every being can spot me before I even notice them. It's fine, Fluttershy. So, are we almost there?
The bear nodded and pointed a little to the right of the direction Twilight had been walking in. Noticing her error, Twilight blushed a little, to which Fluttershy merely smiled kindly. The bear turned and took the lead, either clearing or showing the way for Twilight's much smaller and less confident steps. Within a minute, they had clambered through the last of the underbrush and found themselves stepping out into a clearing. Twilight stumbled forward, captivated at the sight that she beheld. Her attention was so focused on what was in front of her that she hardly even noticed her hooves slipping out from under her, caught on a tree root. The bear's large paws were there to catch the unicorn just in time, placing her back on her hooves while giving her a wary look.
Where are we?
The unicorn asked, breathlessly, her eyes frantically running this way and that, trying to take it all in. Fluttershy merely smiled and waved a dramatic paw towards the objects of Twilight's fascination.
Welcome to Ponyville.
Twilight had enough sense to at least close her mouth, though not enough to look and walk at the same time. The collection of hovels and lean-tos that she had expected was nowhere to be found. Instead, there was a plethora of strange and wonderful homes made from just about everything Twilight could imagine. Directly in front of her sat a large tree that stretched up into the canopy. It was quite the sight to behold. All over it were marks of civilization, circular windows dotted the outside of the tree, and softly glowing red crystals dangled from hundreds of branches, bathing the entire area in a strange eerie light that neither illuminated everything, nor created shadows overly deep. Twilight smiled, despite the strange situation. Her analytical mind was already deciphering the enigma of her surroundings. The glow could be seen for a great distance, but such intensity would usually come with the light source being nearly blinding. Now that she was relatively close, it was neither blinding nor eerie, but rather pleasant. And the longer Twilight looked at it, the more she was forced to admit that the artificial additions to the tree only accentuated its beauty, rather than taking away from it. The tree itself was a huge structure that was probably the size of 4 or 5 of Twilight's houses in Canterlot, squished side by side, and probably 10 of them tall before the windows petered out, though something told Twilight that the hospital itself probably extended beyond what the lack of windows might imply. The wood was a soft, earthy red color that snaked along the branches, but became more green as the tree rose skyward, culminating in rich, vibrant green leaves that stood out against the reddish trunk. Initially, it seemed as though it would be a waste to kill such a massive tree in order to use it as a structure of some kind. But, seeing the fresh leaves rustle in the wind, she quickly realized that the tree was still alive and thriving. Its life-giving liquids ran just below the bark, leaving the long-dead, hollowed-out part as a place of healing and renewal. Clearly, there was a careful hoof and powerful magic involved as well. Beyond the tree, Twilight could see enormous mushrooms the size of adult spruces, their windows emanating the soft artificial glow of candlelight, indicating that they were being used much in the same way the hospital was. Perhaps even more surprising than either of those were the random boulders that dotted the landscape. They lay between trees and jutted out of the forest floor haphazardly, each and every one hollowed out much akin to the trees and mushrooms around. Strangest of all, though, was the distinct lack of ponies or beings that would have lived in such a town. It seemed deserted, and the few spots of movement that did catch the unicorn's eye were simple birds or small animals who apparently had the courage to wander through the center of town. Though despite not seeing any being around, Twilight couldn't shake the distinct impression that she was being watched. With a shudder, she turned her thoughts away from such grim musings and back to the strange and fascinating buildings that she had seen. The skill and craftsmanship that had to go into those wonderful buildings were beyond Twilight's wildest imagination. She wondered how long it would take to construct even a single home from any of those strange materials the inhabitants had chosen. Her eyes narrowed slightly as she saw a faint glimmer of something, her curiosity sparking. She focused on the spot and peered deeper into the gloom. Her eyes were unsuited to the low light, but even they could see the black stone building that she hadn't noticed before. It was small, narrow, and reminded Twilight of one of the many watchtowers that dotted the walls surrounding Canterlot and the palace. But where Celestia's towers were grand and sparkling, made to be seen from far and wide, these were inconspicuous and nearly invisible while shrouded in the mid-evening gloom. Twilight was completely sure that she could walk within a few feet of one without noticing the nearly 5-story tall tower. If it wasn't for the glint of something that she had seen, the tower would have stayed hidden. The thought sent a shiver down Twilight's spine, and a thought occurred to her.
There was probably a lot more than just the one tower, so how many of those could I have passed in the woods without even noticing that they were there?
A small cough made Twilight look down, where a small white and brown spotted bunny with familiar eyes looked up at her.
So, what do you think? I may not stay here often, but to me, Ponyville is home. It's...
Twilight paused, trying to think of the right words to properly display the awe and wonder that she was feeling. However, a writer or a poet she was not.
It's big and intriguing. Do you know what those towers are made of?
Fluttershy shook her tiny head.
I don't know. The night guard don't let anyone inside, and...
The bunny looked both ways before whispering.
They're kinda scary. All big and black, and sometimes I bump into them into the forest without even noticing.
The bunny shivered and hopped a step closer to Twilight. The unicorn grinned, despite her companion's fear. There was much to learn while she was trapped in this unfamiliar place, and she decided then and there that she would learn as much as she could in order to bring that knowledge back with her to Canterlot. She took a step forward, only to forget about her back leg and nearly fell flat on her face yet again. Thankfully, she caught herself and shook her head.
Focus, Twilight. First things first.
Twilight couldn't quite see the entrance to the hospital from here, and judging from the location of the rest of the town, it was probably just on the other side. As she trotted closer, she noticed the soft padding of Fluttershy's tiny feet no longer following her. Twisting over her shoulder, Twilight noticed the bunny hadn't moved from her spot and was rubbing her tiny paws together nervously.
What's wrong, Fluttershy?
Twilight asked, turning and lowering herself to look the bunny in the eye.
It's just... Well, I don't like the hospital. I know it sounds silly, but I'll just wait over here for you if that's okay.
Fluttershy pulled one ear down over her eye and looked away shyly. Suddenly, the prospect of going into the hospital became much more terrifying to the unicorn when she realized that she had to do so alone. Twilight hadn't even thought that her new friend would stay behind, and the thought of going into this new and strange place without Fluttershy made what little courage Twilight had left to slip away.
I don't like hospitals much either. The one time I went in, some pony tried to vivisect me.
The unicorn laughed nervously, but stopped quickly when she noticed Fluttershy was trembling at the thought.
Maybe we could face our fear together?
The bunny looked off to the side, unable to meet Twilight's gaze, her paws running down her ear nervously.
I don't know, Twilight.
Fluttershy muttered.
Please, Fluttershy, I don't know any other beings. Everyone else is gone, and I'm scared.
The unicorn looked down. The realization that she was well and truly alone for the first time in her life was a crushing one. Fluttershy hopped closer and gently moved Twilight's nose.
Okay, I'll come with you, but could I ride on your back? I don't want to get lost and left behind in there.
The unicorn smiled, her courage slowly creeping back up her spine.
Sounds good.
Twilight lowered herself closer to the ground, being wary not to put any weight on her injured leg. Fluttershy scrambled onto her back and gripped Twilight's fur tightly, her body pressed tight against the unicorn's neck.
All set back there?
The bunny took a deep breath and nodded.
Okay, I'm ready.
Man, that must be frickin' awesome to live in a hollowed-out tree. Granted, if it's big enough, but still, it sounds so awesome. Now let's get on to our bright donators. Top donators: TacoCat598, Peter Coulthard, J Tinman, Darkside, Gauntlet, and Only One Thing. Zar630, Strix, Raiden, Narwhals, Black Moonheart, Drake Lovedragon, Pastel Skies, Austin Roland, CrazyKiller557, Stu Hex, Dospo, Madman Stan, Delta Omega, Jack Hadge, Rinscythe9852, Leslie Prickett, Hunter Norman, Stephen Bingham, LineGod12, and many more fantastic people. Thank you all so much for watching this video, and live life to the fullest.